On our fifth anniversary, my mother-in-law threw me out in the rain with $200, pointing at my husband kissing his boss's daughter. They called me a useless orphan, unaware that signing those divorce papers activated a secret trust worth $1.05 trillion. 3 years later, I returned not to beg, but to buy the very company where they were now on their knees pleading to keep their jobs. My name is Verity Cross. And for 5 years, I had convinced myself that if I just loved hard enough, I could turn a house of cold marble and sharp tongues into a home. I was wrong. The realization did not come all at once, but it culminated on a Tuesday evening, the night of our 5th wedding anniversary. In the kitchen of the Thorne estate, the air in the penthouse smelled of rosemary and roasted lamb, a scent that usually brought warmth. But tonight it felt heavy, almost suffocating. I wiped my hands on my apron, checking the reflection in the oven door. My dress was simple, a white silk slip dress I had bought at a thrift store and tailored myself. It was the only thing I owned that felt elegant enough for the Thornes, yet humble enough not to offend them. To me, it was beautiful. To my mother-in-law, I knew it would just look like another reminder of where I came from. I had spent the last 6 hours preparing everything from scratch: the glaze for the carrots, the reduction for the sauce, the chocolate soufflé that Julian loved. I wanted tonight to be perfect. I needed it to be perfect. Beatrice Thorne entered the kitchen not with a greeting, but with the click-clack of her designer heels on the tile. She stopped at the island, running a manicured finger along the granite counter, checking for dust that she knew would not be there. "You are still cooking," she observed, her voice dry and devoid of affection. "Julian will be home any minute. Do you intend to smell like grease when you greet your husband?" I untied my apron, folding it neatly. "Dinner is ready to be served. Beatrice, I just wanted to keep it warm. Is Julian on his way up?" Beatrice let out a short, sharp sigh, the kind one might use when dealing with a slow child. She leaned against the counter, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "You try so hard. Verity, it is almost painful to watch. Do you really think a home-cooked meal compensates for what you lack?" I stiffened but kept my voice steady. "I love Julian. I take care of him." "Love," she sneered, the word tasting like vinegar in her mouth. "Love does not pay the mortgage on this penthouse. Love does not secure mergers or expand the family portfolio. Julian is a Thorne. He needs a partner who brings capital, connections, and status to the table. You bring—" "What exactly?" "Memories of a state-run orphanage and a recipe for pot roast." The sting was familiar, a dull ache I had learned to live with. "I support him emotionally. I make sure he has a sanctuary to come home to." Beatrice laughed, a cold sound that bounced off the stainless steel appliances. "A sanctuary. Men like Julian do not need sanctuaries. Verity, they need empires. And you are not an empress. You are a placeholder, an investment that has failed to yield a return for 5 years. Before I could respond, the front door chime echoed through the hallway. My heart leaped. Julian. He would fix this. He always smoothed things over, even if he never truly defended me. I smoothed down my white dress and walked toward the foyer, Beatrice trailing behind me like a dark shadow. I opened the door, a smile already forming on my lips. "Happy anniversary, Jules." The words died in my throat. Julian stood there, looking dashing in his charcoal suit, but he was not holding flowers. He was not holding a gift. He was holding the door open for someone else. A woman stepped in past him. She was radiant, draped in a shimmering silver gown that likely cost more than the entire budget of the orphanage I grew up in. Her blonde hair was a cascade of perfect waves, and her skin glowed with the kind of health that only extreme wealth can buy. Tiffany Sterling. I knew her. Of course, everyone knew her. She was the only daughter of Marcus Sterling, the CEO of the Sterling Group, the massive conglomerate where Julian served as a divisional director. She was the golden child of New York high society. "Surprise," Tiffany said, her voice light and bubbly, though her eyes were sharp as they landed on me. I looked at Julian. confusion clouding my vision. Julian, what is going on? It is our anniversary dinner. Julian avoided my gaze, focusing on loosening his tie. I know, Verity. But something came up at work, a crucial development with the merger. Tiffany and I needed to discuss strategy, and I could not just leave her at the office. So you brought her to our anniversary dinner, I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Oh, do not be such a bore, Tiffany interjected, stepping further into the foyer as if she owned it. I have heard so much about your cooking. Julian says it is quaint. Besides, my father wanted me to get to know the team better. Julian is a key player, after all. Beatrice stepped forward, her face transforming instantly from a scowl to a beaming, obsequious smile. Tiffany, darling, what a delightful surprise. You light up the room. Please, come in. The dining room is set. Beatrice, you look stunning as always, Tiffany said, leaning in to kiss the air beside my mother-in-law's cheek. She then glanced at me, her smile tight and pitying. And you must be Verity. Cute dress, very vintage. It is ready to wear, Beatrice corrected quickly, guiding Tiffany toward the dining room. Come, sit. Verity was just about to serve. I stood frozen in the foyer, looking at my husband. He finally looked at me, his expression tired and unapologetic. Don't start. Verity, this is important for my career. Just get through dinner, please. I made your favorite, I whispered. Just for us. We will eat it together, he said, brushing past me. Just set another place. I felt a crack in my chest, a hairline fracture in the foundation of my marriage, but I did as I was told. I was Verity Cross, the survivor. I could survive a dinner. 10 minutes later, I found myself sitting at my own dining table, feeling like an intruder. Beatrice had placed Tiffany at the head of the table, opposite herself, while Julian sat on one side and I was relegated to the other, facing the wall. The conversation flowed over my head like water. They spoke of stocks, of acquisitions, of summer homes in the Hamptons, and winter ski trips to Aspen. Daddy is thinking of restructuring the executive board, Tiffany said, twirling her wine glass a glass of vintage Bordeaux that cost $4,000 a bottle, which Beatrice had eagerly opened the moment Tiffany arrived. He thinks the company needs fresh blood at the very top, someone young, hungry, someone like you. Julian. Julian's eyes lit up in a way they never did when he looked at me. I have some ideas for the Asian market expansion that I think Marcus would appreciate. Oh, I am sure he would, Tiffany purred, leaning forward, her neckline dipping dangerously low. He trusts my judgment implicitly, and I think you have potential. Julian is destined for greatness, Beatrice chimed in, cutting her steak with aggressive precision. He has the Thorne legacy in his blood. He just needs the right platform and the right partner. I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. Julian has a partner, I said, my voice cutting through their sycophantic bubble. The table went silent. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. Beatrice looked annoyed. Tiffany looked amused, and Julian looked embarrassed. Verity, please, Julian muttered. Oh, let her speak, Tiffany said, offering a smile that did not reach her eyes. It is adorable. You think being a partner means folding laundry and cooking pot roast, don't you? It means being there when things are hard, I said, looking directly at Julian. It means loyalty, Beatrice scoffed, placing her knife down with a clatter. Loyalty does not pay the bills. Child, look at this table. Look at Tiffany. She is a queen. She commands rooms. She understands the weight of power. And look at you. You are a servant in a silk dress. You are holding him back. Mother, Julian warned weakly, but he did not disagree. It is the truth, Beatrice insisted. Compare them. Julian, just look. Tiffany can give you the sterling empire. Verity can give you... What more leftovers? I felt tears pricking my eyes, hot and humiliating. I am his wife. For now, Tiffany said softly. She reached for the bottle of wine to refill her glass. As she did, her hand seemed to spasm. The bottle tilted aggressively. A wave of dark crimson liquid shot out of the neck, splashing directly onto my chest. I gasped, jumping back, but it was too late. The red wine soaked into the white silk instantly, spreading like a fresh, bloody wound across my heart. The cold liquid seeped through to my skin, shocking and sticky. "Oh!" Tiffany exclaimed, her hand flying to her mouth in a mockery of shock. But I saw it. I saw the glint of malice in her eyes. It was no accident. "My dress," I whispered, looking down at the ruined fabric. It was ruined, irrevocably. "Oh dear," Beatrice said, not sounding sorry in the least. "That is going to stain. Although, perhaps it is an improvement. White really is not your color." I looked at Julian, waiting. This was the moment. This was the moment he would stand up, hand me his napkin, yell at them, defend me. He was my husband. Julian looked at the stain, then at Tiffany's feigned distress. "I am so sorry, Julian," Tiffany said, pouting. "I am just so clumsy tonight. I hope I did not ruin the mood." Julian let out a breath and reached out, not to me, but to touch Tiffany's hand. "It is okay, Tiff. It was an accident. Do not worry about it." He turned to me, his eyes cold and distant. "Verity, go change. You are making a scene, and honestly, you should have moved your glass. You are so clumsy sometimes." The air left my lungs. He was apologizing to her. He was blaming me. I stood up, shaking. "I am making a scene." She threw wine on me. "Julian." "Stop it," he snapped. "Stop acting like a victim. It is exhausting." "Exhausting," I repeated, my voice rising. "I have spent 5 years trying to be enough for you. I have endured your mother's cruelty. I have cooked, I have cleaned, I have supported every dream you had. And on our anniversary, you bring your boss's daughter home and let her treat me like trash. That is enough." Beatrice slammed her hand on the table. The silver rattled. "I will not have you speak to my son or our guests like that in my house." "This is my house too," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I said them. "Is it?" Beatrice stood up, walking around the table until she stood next to Julian. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a physical claim of ownership. "Julian, the time for games is over. We have a decision to make. The Sterling board meets on Monday. Tiffany has made it clear that if you want the CEO position, you need to be part of the family, the Sterling family." I looked at Julian. He was staring at his wine glass, refusing to meet my eyes. "What is she saying, Julian?" I asked. Beatrice answered for him. "I am saying that you are a liability. Verity. If Julian stays with you, I will cut him off. No inheritance, no trust fund, no access to the Thorn network, and he can say goodbye to the CEO job at Sterling. He will be a nobody, just like you." She looked down at her son. "Choose, Julian, a future as a king with a queen by your side, or a life of mediocrity with a charity case." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of my own heart. I looked at the man I had married, the man I had promised to love in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer. I thought those vows meant something to him. Julian slowly lifted his head. He looked at Tiffany, who was smiling that predatory, winning smile. Then he looked at his mother, who stood firm and commanding. Finally, he looked at me. There was no love in his eyes. There was no conflict. There was only calculation. He looked at me and saw a sinking ship, and he was not about to go down with the wreckage. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for his left hand. My breath hitched. "Julian, no." He twisted the gold band on his ring finger. It slid off easily, as if it had never truly belonged there. He held it up for a second, the gold catching the light of the chandelier. Before he dropped it into his half-full wine glass, it made a small clink sound as it hit the bottom, sinking into the dark red liquid. "I am sorry, Verity," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "But ambition is bigger than love." He turned to Tiffany. "I think we should discuss that restructuring plan now." I stood there, dripping with wine, shivering in the air-conditioned cold, watching my husband sell his soul for a title. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The man I loved did not exist. He was a fiction I had written to make my life bearable, and now the story was over. "Get out," Beatrice said, waving her hand as if shooing a fly. "The driver will take you to a motel. You have 1 hour to pack your things." I looked at them one last time, the tableau of greed and betrayal. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply turned around and walked out of the dining room. But as I walked away, I knew one thing: I was leaving that room. But I was not disappearing. They thought they were discarding trash. They had no idea they were planting a seed. The silence that followed Julian's departure from the dining room was not empty. It was heavy, filled with the rustle of paper and the distinct, predatory hum of satisfaction radiating from my mother-in-law. I stood there, the wine stain on my chest cooling into a sticky, uncomfortable patch against my skin, shivering not from the temperature, but from the sudden, violent dismantling of my reality. Beatrice did not give me time to process the heartbreak. To her, this was not a family tragedy. It was a business transaction, and she was closing the deal. She snapped her fingers, and a man I had not noticed before stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. It was Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer. He had been waiting. They had planned this down to the minute. "Sit," Beatrice commanded, sliding a thick document across the mahogany table, right over the spot where Julian's plate still held the untouched pot roast I had spent hours preparing. I did not move. "I am not signing anything." "Oh, you are signing," Beatrice said, her voice smooth and lethal. "Or do you prefer to leave with absolutely nothing, rather than the pittance I am generous enough to offer?" Mr. Henderson opened the document to the last page. "Mrs. Thorne, if you recall, the prenuptial agreement you signed 5 years ago was quite specific. It states that in the event of a divorce, regardless of cause, the spouse entering the marriage with fewer assets is entitled to 0 alimony and 0 claim on marital property if the marriage dissolves before the 10-year mark." "I signed that because Julian told me it was just a formality," I whispered, my voice cracking. "He said it was to protect the company, not to hurt me. He said we would never need it." "Julian says a lot of things," Tiffany chirped from the doorway. She was leaning against the frame, sipping her wine, watching me like I was a reality television show she had stumbled upon. "Men will say anything to get what they want, and then, when they grow up, they do what they need." Beatrice tapped the paper with a manicured nail. "The clause is ironclad. Verity, you get nothing, no house, no car, no spousal support. However, because I am a benevolent woman, and because I want you out of this house within the hour without a scene, I am authorizing a cash transfer of $200 to your account, enough for a bus ticket to wherever people like you go. $200. 5 years of my life. 5 years of scrubbing their floors, organizing their galas, soothing Julian's ego, and enduring Beatrice's insults. All of it was valued at $200. "I contributed to this household," I argued, a spark of desperate anger igniting in my chest. "I worked. I tried to get a job for 5 years to contribute financially, but I could never land one. I tried." Beatrice let out a low, dark laugh. It was a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. She walked around the table and leaned in close to my ear, smelling of expensive perfume and rot. "Did you really think you were that unlucky? Verity," she whispered, "you have a degree in economics. You graduated with honors. Did you honestly believe that in a city this big, nobody wanted to hire you?" I froze. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that every time you had an interview, I made a call," Beatrice confessed, her eyes gleaming with malice. "I flagged your name. I told them you were unstable. I told them you were a liability. I made sure every door was slammed in your face before you even knocked. I needed you dependent. Verity, I needed you desperate and small, so that you would focus entirely on serving Julian until he was ready for a real wife. The air left my lungs. The rejection letters. The interviews that went perfectly but ended in silence. The crushing sense of inadequacy I had carried for half a decade. Thinking I was not good enough. That I was flawed. It had not been me. It had been her. She had systematically clipped my wings to keep me in a cage. And now that she was bored with the pet, she was throwing the cage out. You are a monster, I breathed. I am a mother protecting her dynasty, she corrected. Straightening up. Sign the papers. Now. I looked at the pen she held out. I wanted to stab it into the table. I wanted to scream. But I looked at Mr. Henderson, whose face was impassive, and at Tiffany, who was smirking. I had no money for a lawyer. I had no family to call. If I fought them now, they would drag this out, bleed me dry, and I would end up on the street anyway, with a trembling hand. I took the pen. I signed my name, Verity Thorne, the last time I would ever write it. Good, Beatrice said, snatching the paper away before the ink was dry. Henderson, file it immediately. Now, get out. My things, I stammered. I need to pack. Way ahead of you, Tiffany said, gesturing to the front door. I walked to the foyer, my legs feeling like lead. There, sitting on the marble floor near the entrance, was a single, battered suitcase. It was not one of the Louis Vuitton sets Julian and I used for travel. It was an old, gray fabric suitcase with a broken wheel, the one I had brought with me from the orphanage 5 years ago. I packed for you, Tiffany said, walking over and patting the top of the case. I put in all the things that looked like they belonged to you. You know, the cheap stuff. I threw out the rest. I need the closet space, and frankly, I do not want your smell lingering in my bedroom. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Thank you, by the way, for keeping the seat warm. You trained him well. He is housebroken. He knows how to dress, and he is eager to please. You did the hard work so I could enjoy the finished product. Now, give him back to his real owner. I stared at her, unable to form words. The cruelty was so casual, so effortless. Escort her out, Beatrice barked from the dining room. 2 large security guards, men who had smiled at me every morning for 5 years, men I had made coffee for, stepped forward. Their faces were stone. They were not my friends. They were paid employees, and I was no longer on the payroll. Mrs. Thorne, please, one of them said, reaching for my arm. Miss Cross, Beatrice corrected loudly. They grabbed me, not gently. They gripped my upper arms with bruising force, propelling me toward the heavy oak doors. Wait, I cried, trying to grab the handle of my suitcase. Let me get my bag. The guard kicked the suitcase, sending it skidding across the floor and out onto the front porch. Then he shoved me. I stumbled, the heels of my shoes catching on the threshold, and I fell hard onto the stone steps outside. The door slammed shut behind me. The sound was final, like a gunshot. I was outside, and it was pouring. The sky had opened up, unleashing a torrent of freezing rain that soaked through my wine-stained dress in seconds. The wind howled through the manicured hedges of the estate, whipping my hair across my face. I gasped, the cold shock making my teeth chatter instantly. I crawled toward my suitcase. It was sitting in a puddle of mud near the edge of the driveway. I grabbed the handle and pulled it upright, but the zipper had burst open from the guard's kick. My clothes, my old jeans, my worn sweaters, the few books I owned were spilling out into the slush. I frantically tried to shove them back in, my hands shaking uncontrollably, mud coating my fingers. No, 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 I sobbed, the tears mixing with the rain. A flash of movement above caught my eye. I looked up. On the second-floor balcony, shielded by a glass awning, stood Julian. He was holding a fresh glass of wine. Tiffany was wrapped around him, her head resting on his shoulder, her hand flat against his chest. Julian, I screamed, my voice tearing through the storm. "Julian, please, it is raining. I have nowhere to go." He looked down. He saw me. He saw his wife of 5 years kneeling in the mud, ruined and begging. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker of hesitation, but then Tiffany whispered something in his ear and laughed. Julian's face smoothed over. He did not look angry. He did not look sad. He looked bored. He looked at me with the same indifference one might show a stray dog barking at a passing car. He took a sip of his wine, turned his back on me, and led Tiffany back inside. The balcony doors slid shut, and the curtains were drawn. The light went out. I was alone in the dark. I do not know how long I sat there in the mud, staring at the closed curtains. Eventually, the cold seeped into my bones, forcing me to move. Survival instinct, dormant for years under layers of comfort, flickered back to life. I dragged my broken suitcase down the long driveway. The wheel wobbled and scraped against the asphalt, a rhythmic sound of defeat. I walked out of the gated community, past the security booth where the guard refused to make eye contact, and onto the main road. New York City is a beast. When you are on top, it is a playground of lights and promise. When you are at the bottom, it is a labyrinth of steel and indifference. I walked for hours. My heels broke, forcing me to take off my shoes and walk barefoot on the rough pavement. My feet bled, leaving faint red tracks that the rain washed away instantly. I tried to hail a cab, but the drivers took one look at me, a soaking wet, disheveled woman in a stained dress dragging a broken suitcase, and sped up. They thought I was crazy. They thought I was a junkie. I checked my phone. The screen remained black. Dead battery. I reached into the side pocket of the suitcase where I had stashed the emergency cash Beatrice had mentioned, hoping the transfer had been immediate or that I had some physical cash left. I found $200 in wet bills tucked into a side pocket of my old jeans. $200. In this city, that would not even get me a hotel room for the night, not without a credit card for a deposit, which I no longer had. I kept walking, my body going numb. I needed shelter. I needed to get out of the rain before hypothermia set in. I found myself near an entrance to an old, abandoned subway line in the Lower East Side, a place I had volunteered at once during a charity drive years ago. The gate was chained, but I knew there was a gap in the fence behind the maintenance shed. I squeezed through, the rusted metal tearing the silk of my dress, scratching my skin. I stumbled down the concrete stairs, out of the wind, into the damp, musty darkness of the underground. The air smelled of oil and old urine. But it was dry. I collapsed against a graffiti-covered wall, pulling my knees to my chest, wrapping my arms around myself to preserve whatever body heat I had left. My suitcase sat beside me like a tombstone, in the silence of the tunnel, broken only by the distant rumble of active trains miles away. A memory surfaced. It was not a memory of Julian. It was older. I was 10 years old. I was in the small, cramped living room of my adoptive parents, the couple who had taken me in for 2 years before they died in that car accident. Sending me back to the system, they were quiet people, always looking over their shoulders, always teaching me things a child did not need to know. Verity, my adoptive father had said, his face stern as he taught me how to read a compass. The world is not kind. It will try to break you. It will take everything you have. When that happens, you do not cry. Tears are water, and water yields. You must be stone. You must be fire. You remember who you are, even when they tell you that you are nothing. I had never understood what he meant by who you are. I thought I was just an orphan. But tonight, huddled in the dark, his voice echoed with terrifying clarity. They had taken my home. They had taken my husband. They had taken my dignity. They had stripped me of my name, my future, and my pride. Beatrice thought she had destroyed me. She thought that by taking away the Thorn name, she had left me with nothing, but she was wrong. I stopped shivering. The cold was still there, biting at my skin, but inside, something else was rising. It was not heat. It was ice, a deep, glacial rage that froze the tears on my cheeks. I looked at my hands, caked in mud and blood. They were shaking, but not from fear anymore. "I am not nothing," I whispered to the empty tracks. The echo bounced back, stronger. "I am not nothing." They wanted a victim. They would not get one. They wanted me to disappear. I would vanish so completely that they would forget I ever existed. And while they slept in their silk sheets and drank their vintage wine, I would be in the darkness, sharpening the knife. Julian chose ambition over love. Beatrice chose greed over family. Tiffany chose cruelty over grace. Fine. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the cold concrete. The girl who cooked pot roast and begged for affection died tonight in the rain. The woman who woke up tomorrow would be something entirely different. I would not just survive, I would hunt. The address was burned into my memory, not because I visited it often, but because for 20 years. It was the return address on the single birthday card I received annually. Arthur Harrison, attorney at law. He was the only thread connecting me to a history I did not know. A ghost who sent generic greetings and $10 bills to a lonely girl in the system. I stood before the building in the financial district. It was not a glass monolith like the Sterling or Thorne Towers. It was a narrow, pre-war brownstone squeezed between two modern giants. Dark and imposing, with iron bars on the windows that looked less like decoration and more like a fortress. My hands were still trembling from the cold and the shock of the night. I looked down at my ruined dress, the dried wine stain looking like a dark bruise on my chest, my bare feet bleeding and blackened by the city streets. I looked like a madwoman. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the brass intercom. What if he turned me away? What if he was just a court-appointed guardian who had long forgotten me? I pressed the button. Yes, a voice crackled through the speaker. It was old, dry, and sharp. "Mr. Harrison." My voice was a rasp. "It is Verity Cross." There was a pause, a silence so long I thought he had hung up. Then, the heavy oak door buzzed with a mechanical click. "Top floor," the voice said. "Do not stop on the way up." The elevator was an ancient birdcage style, rattling as it ascended. When the doors opened, I stepped into a room that smelled of cedar, old leather, and secrets. The walls were lined with books that looked like they had not been touched in a century. Sitting behind a massive desk was a man who looked just as ancient. Arthur Harrison was thin, with skin like parchment paper and eyes that were terrifyingly alert. He did not look at my dirty clothes. He did not look at my bare feet. He looked at the clock on the wall. "You are early," he said, his voice devoid of surprise. "We calculated that the Thorne woman would break you by your 32nd birthday. You are 27. Beatrice is more efficient than we anticipated." I stared at him, my fatigue momentarily replaced by confusion. You knew this would happen." "We counted on it," Harrison said calmly. He opened a drawer and pulled out a scanner. "Place your hand here. We need to verify the biometric markers." "I came here for help," I said, backing away slightly. "I have nowhere to go. I thought you might know who my parents were. I thought—" "Place your hand on the scanner. Verity," he commanded. The authority in his voice was absolute, a tone that did not brook disobedience. Driven by a mix of fear and exhaustion, I placed my palm on the glass. A red light swept under my skin. A green light beeped on his monitor. Harrison let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for decades. He picked up a telephone on his desk. It had no dial, just a single red line. "Protocol 0 is active," he said into the receiver. "The Phoenix has been burned. Prepare the extraction." He hung up and looked at me. "Your name is not Verity Cross. That was a placeholder, a mask to keep you hidden in plain sight. You are the granddaughter of Elias Vane." The name hit me like a physical blow. Elias Vane, the Wolf of Wall Street before there were wolves, the man who supposedly died in a plane crash 30 years ago, leaving behind a legacy of ruthless acquisitions and shadow banking. He was a myth, a monster of the financial world. My parents, Your parents were soft, Harrison cut in. They wanted to be artists, philanthropists. They rejected Elias's world. So when they died, Elias took you. But he did not want another soft heir. He did not want someone who would squander his empire on charity balls and yachts. He wanted a survivor. He wanted someone who knew what it felt like to be nothing, so they would understand the true value of being everything. He stood up and walked to a safe in the corner. The Vane Trust has a single, ironclad condition for inheritance, drafted by Elias himself. The heir must be stripped of all protection. She must be discarded by society. She must experience total ruin, and most importantly, she must legally sever ties with any other family name. He turned. Holding a tablet, on the screen was a digital copy of the divorce papers I had signed less than 3 hours ago. When you signed this, Harrison said, tapping the screen, you did not just end your marriage, you activated the inheritance. You proved that the Thorne family had failed you. You proved you were alone. And only when you are alone are you ready to lead. Lead what? I whispered. I have $200 and a stained dress. Not anymore, Harrison said. Come with me. We do not have much time. The Thorne family creates ripples, but the Vane legacy creates tsunamis. People will be looking for you soon. He led me to a bookshelf that swung open to reveal a private elevator. We descended past the lobby, past the basement, deep into the bedrock of Manhattan. A car was waiting in a subterranean garage, a black armored SUV with tinted windows. Where are we going? I asked, as we sped through a tunnel I never knew existed, bypassing the city traffic. Teterboro Airport, Harrison replied. Switzerland is waiting. The flight was a blur of efficiency. It was not a luxury jet with champagne and caviar. It was a flying command center. I was given medical attention, a nutrient IV, and a set of simple gray clothing. I slept for 6 hours, a dreamless, black sleep born of exhaustion. When I woke, we were landing in a valley surrounded by the Alps. The air outside was thin and biting. A convoy took us to a facility built into the side of a mountain. It looked like a villain's lair from a movie, all concrete and steel, hidden from the world. We walked down long, sterile corridors until we reached a massive set of double doors. Harrison placed his hand on a scanner, and the doors hissed open. The room beyond was a circular observation deck. In the center, suspended in the air, was a massive holographic globe, pulsing with lines of data, numbers, and currency symbols. Dozens of people sat at terminals in the pit below, working in hushed tones. Welcome to Archon Capital, Harrison said. I walked to the railing, looking down at the hive of activity. What is this? This, Harrison said, gesturing to the globe, is the engine of the world. Elias Vane did not just leave you money, he left you a shadow bank. Archon Capital does not operate on the public stock exchange. We operate in the dark pools. We finance wars. We stabilize currencies. We buy governments. And we bankrupt corporations that displease us. He tapped a command on the console in front of us. The holographic globe shifted, coalescing into a single, glowing number. Assets under management, $1,050 billion. I stared at the number. I blinked. Sure, I was hallucinating. $1.05 trillion. That is impossible, I stammered. Nobody has that much money. Countries do, Harrison corrected. And Archon, this is the accumulation of 50 years of aggressive, predatory, and brilliant compounding interest, shielded from tax agencies by a labyrinth of shell companies and sovereign immunity treaties. He turned to face me, his expression grave. And as of 4 hours ago, you are the sole beneficiary and chairman of the board. My knees gave way. I grabbed the railing to steady myself. Yesterday, I was worried about the price of beef for a pot roast. Today, I owned the price of beef. I can buy anything, I asked, my voice trembling. You can buy everything, Harrison said. You could buy the Sterling Group 1,000 times over and use their headquarters as a storage closet. You could bankrupt the Thorne family before lunch, but he paused, his eyes hardening. You will not receive a single penny today. I looked at him, the whiplash of emotions making me dizzy. What? Elias was cruel, but he was not stupid, Harrison explained. You have the blood, and you have the trauma, but you do not have the skills. If I gave you access to this terminal right now, you would be dead in a week, assassinated by rivals, or imprisoned for regulatory oversight, or simply manipulated by people smarter than you. He stepped closer, his old eyes boring into mine. The money is held in a blind trust. You have 3 years. For the next 3 years, you will not leave this mountain. You will not contact the outside world. You are dead to New York. Here, you will learn. You will learn forensic accounting, corporate law, psychological warfare, and combat. You will learn how to smile while you cut a man's throat in a boardroom. You will learn to be a queen. And if I refuse, I asked, if I just want to take some money and disappear, then you get the $200 in your pocket, and you leave. Harrison said simply, Archon dissolves. The funds go to various charities, and you go back to being the woman who was thrown out in the rain. I thought of Julian. I thought of his indifference as he looked down from the balcony. I thought of Beatrice's laugh. I thought of Tiffany calling me a placeholder. If I took the money and ran, I would be safe, but I would still be Verity. I would still be the victim. But if I stayed... I looked at the hologram. $1 trillion. That was not money. That was a weapon, a nuclear warhead waiting for a finger on the button. I will stay, I said. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold certainty. Good, Harrison said. Then Verity Cross dies here. The staff needs a name to address you by. Take me to my quarters, I said. My room was stark, efficient, and cold. A bed, a desk, a computer terminal, and a bathroom. I walked into the bathroom and turned on the lights. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was pathetic. Her long brown hair was matted with mud and rain. Her eyes were red-rimmed and wide with shock. She looked soft. She looked like a wife. I reached into the drawer and found a pair of medical shears. They were heavy, sharp, and cold steel. I grabbed a handful of my long hair, the hair Julian used to say he loved, the hair Beatrice told me to tie back because it looked messy. Snip, the sound was satisfying. A lock of brown hair fell into the white sink. I cut again and again. I hacked away at the vanity, at the softness, at the desire to be loved. With every cut, I felt lighter. I was carving away the girl who begged. I was carving away the girl who cooked and cleaned and waited. When I was done, my hair was short, jagged, and fierce. It framed my face in sharp angles, exposing the jawline I had always hidden. I looked at my eyes. The warmth was gone. In its place was something dark, ancient, and hungry. I washed the mud from my face. I scrubbed the wine stain from my skin until I was raw and red. Verity Cross was a good woman. She was kind, she was patient, and she was dead. I dropped the shears into the sink, the metal clattering against the porcelain. I walked out of the bathroom and picked up the internal phone on the desk. Harrison, I said, my voice dropping an octave, steady and commanding. I am here, the lawyer answered. My name is V, I said, and I am ready to begin. Time is a strange variable. When you are suffering, it stretches like taffy, sticky and endless. When you are learning to become a weapon, it compresses. 3 years at the Archon facility in the Swiss Alps felt like 3 decades of evolution crammed into 1,000 days of hell. My alarm rang at 4 a.m. every single day. There were no weekends, no holidays, no sick days. My world became a cycle of data, pain, and reconstruction. Again, the voice commanded. I sat in a freezing room, staring at a bank of 6 monitors. My eyes burned. The Asian markets are opening, the voice said. Short the yen, leverage the lithium futures. You have 30 seconds to spot the weakness in the Tokyo tech sector before the bell. The man pacing behind me was Damon Vane. He was my grandfather's adopted son, a ghost in the financial world, and the only person at Archon who terrified me more than Arthur Harrison. Damon was 35, with eyes like shattered glass and a mind that operated like a supercomputer. He did not teach with patience. He taught with brutality. I scanned the scrolling tickers. Tech sector is stable, I argued, my voice hoarse. Look closer, Damon snapped. Look at the supply chain reports from Malaysia. A flood destroyed 2 key semiconductor factories 3 hours ago. The news hasn't hit the mainstream wire yet. Find the ripple, I typed furiously. Semiconductors down. That hits automotive and mobile. Tokyo Motors relies on that supplier. Their stock is overvalued by 12% right now. Kill it, he ordered. I executed a massive short position on the simulator. 10 seconds later, the news broke. The stock plummeted. I made a simulated profit of $50 million in 2 minutes. Adequate, Damon muttered, not offering a singular word of praise. Now, to the gym. You have hand-to-hand combat in 5 minutes. If you vomit today, you clean it up. This was my life. Mornings were for finance learning the dark arts of leverage, hostile takeovers, and how to hide assets in a web of shell companies so dense even the IRS would get lost. Afternoons were for psychology and etiquette, how to read a liar, how to eat caviar without looking like a tourist, how to wear a $100,000 gown like it was a second skin. Evenings were for physical conditioning. I learned to fight not to win, but to survive. Krav Maga. Boxing. How to disable a man twice my size with a pen. Damon was always there. He was my tormentor and my anchor. One night, 18 months in, we were sparring. I was exhausted, my muscles screaming. Damon swept my legs, and I hit the mat hard. He pinned me, his forearm against my throat. You are hesitating, he growled, sweat dripping from his brow. You saw the opening, but you didn't take it. Why? I didn't want to hurt you, I gasped, struggling for air. He pressed harder. Wrong answer. In the boardroom, hesitation is death. In the real world, hesitation is death. Do you think Julian hesitated when he threw you out? Do you think Beatrice hesitated when she ruined your career? The names ignited the cold fire in my gut. I twisted my hips, used his momentum against him, and reversed the pin, locking his arm behind his back until he tapped out. We lay there on the mat, panting. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than disdain in his eyes. It was respect. Good, he said, standing up and offering me a hand. I took it. His grip was firm, warm. There was a moment, just a fraction of a second, where he didn't let go. We stood close, the air thick with the smell of sweat and adrenaline. You are changing, V, he said quietly. The soft edges are gone. Is that a compliment? I asked, wiping blood from my lip. It is a warning, he replied. Stepping back, the professional mask sliding back into place. Monsters are lonely creatures. Make sure you can live with what you are becoming. While I was being forged in fire, life in New York continued. Oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon, Harrison provided me with monthly dossiers on the Thorne and Sterling families. I treated them like intelligence reports on enemy combatants. Julian had married Tiffany 6 months after our divorce. The wedding was featured in Vogue. Tiffany wore a custom Vera Wang. Julian wore a smile that looked almost genuine. He had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer of the Sterling Group. Beatrice was living her dream, attending galas on the arm of her successful son, boasting to anyone who would listen about the strategic alliance of the two families. But beneath the glossy photos, the rot was setting in. It started small. Using the skills Damon taught me, I began to probe the Sterling Group's financials from my terminal in the Alps. I found cracks. Julian was ambitious, but he was not brilliant. He was eager to prove himself to his father-in-law, Marcus Sterling, and that eagerness made him reckless. He is over-leveraging on the renewable energy sector, I observed one morning, pointing at the screen. He is betting the company's liquidity on government subsidies that are about to expire. Damon leaned over my shoulder. It is a vanity project. He wants to be the green energy king. What is the play? V. I stared at Julian's face on the screen. He looked older, more tired, but still arrogant. We feed the beast, I said coldly. I created a shell corporation, Nebula Dynamics, based in the Cayman Islands. Through intermediaries, I presented Nebula as a cutting-edge tech firm with a revolutionary battery patent. It was a ghost ship fancy brochures. Fake data. Zero substance. I had my operatives approach Julian. He bit the hook immediately. He saw Nebula as his ticket to outshine his father-in-law. He poured sterling capital into a joint venture with my fake company. 50 million, then 100. He is signing the contracts today, I told Damon, watching the digital signature confirmation appear on my screen. He just committed 20% of Sterling's liquid cash to a vaporware project. And when the prototype fails, Damon asked. The stock dips, I said. And we will be there to catch it. But that was just the jab. The knockout punch was the debt. The Sterling Group had a massive line of credit with Vanguard Private Bank, a mid-sized institution that handled their darker debts, the loans they didn't want, on the public books. Vanguard is unstable, Harrison noted during our weekly briefing. They have too much exposure in real estate. Buy it, I commanded. Harrison raised an eyebrow. Buy the bank. Buy the controlling stake, I said. Use the shell company Apex Holdings. I want to own the debt of the Sterling family. I want to own the mortgage on Beatrice's house. I want to own the loans that keep Julian's yacht afloat. And I want them to have no idea who holds the leash. It cost $400 million, a staggering sum to anyone else, but a rounding error for Archon. Within 48 hours, I was the silent owner of the bank that held the financial fate of my enemies. 3 years. That was the timeline. On the eve of my return, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my quarters. The transformation was complete. Verity Cross, the woman who wore thrift store dresses and apologized for taking up space, was gone. In her place stood V. My hair was a sharp, asymmetrical bob, dyed a jet black that made my pale skin look porcelain. I wore a tailored suit from Alexander McQueen, sharp enough to cut glass. My posture was different spine steel, chin up. I moved with the predatory grace of a panther. Damon entered the room. Holding a tablet, he stopped when he saw me. His eyes traveled over the suit, the hair, the cold determination in my face. You look ready, he said. I am ready, I replied. Is the jet fueled? Yes. We land in Teterboro at 6 a.m. Damon walked over to the desk and picked up a velvet box. Harrison wanted you to have this. It belonged to Elias. I opened the box. Inside was a heavy signet ring, black onyx set in platinum. Engraved with the Archon crest, a hawk holding a serpent. I slid it onto my right index finger. It fit perfectly. There is one more thing, Damon said, his voice lowering. Going back there, seeing him, it will test you. Emotional leverage is the one variable we cannot simulate. I turned to him. You think I still love him? I think hate is just love with its back broken, Damon said. Be careful. V. Do not let the past blind you to the objective. You are not going there to scream at him. You are going there to bury him. I know the mission, Damon. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. The tension that had been simmering between us for 3 years flared up. He reached out, his hand brushing a stray lock of hair from my cheek. His touch was electric, dangerous. If you falter, he whispered, I will not save you. I will replace you. That is the deal. I won't falter, I said, meeting his gaze without blinking. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. Then let's go hunt. We arrived in New York under the cover of a gray dawn. The city skyline rose like a jagged jaw of teeth, waiting to chew me up again. But this time, I was not the prey. Archon Capital had leased the top 10 floors of the newly built Obsidian Tower in Hudson Yards. It was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the Hudson River. As I walked into the lobby, Staff members, analysts, security, lawyers stopped and bowed their heads. They didn't know my name, only my title, the chairwoman. I took the private elevator to the penthouse office. The view was breathtaking. I could see the entire city. Far to the north, I could see the outline of the Upper East Side, where Beatrice Thorne was likely sipping her morning tea, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath her feet had already been sold. Harrison was waiting for me in the boardroom. "The Sterling Group released their quarterly earnings report this morning," he said, handing me a file. "They missed projections. The Nebula project is draining them dry. Their stock is down 8%. "Excellent," I said, taking the seat at the head of the table. "What is the status of their liquidity?" "Critical," Harrison replied. "They need a cash injection within 30 days or they default on their loans. The loans we own." "And Julian?" "Panicking," Harrison said with a rare, dry smile. "He is looking for investors. He is desperate." "Desperation makes people sloppy," I said. "It is time to introduce ourselves." I pressed the intercom button. "Connect me to the PR department." "Yes, chairwoman," a voice answered instantly. "Release the press statement," I ordered. "Archon Capital is officially entering the American market. Announce a $10 billion distressed asset fund and send invitations for the inaugural gala. Make sure the invitations are hand-delivered to the Sterling and Thorne residences. And the theme of the gala." "Ma'am?" I looked out at the city, a cruel smile playing on my lips. "Masquerade," I said. "Tell them to bring their masks. I want them to feel comfortable hiding who they really are before I strip it all away." Damon stood by the window, watching me. "The invite list is exclusive. They will fight to get in." "They will," I agreed. "Julian will see a $10 billion fund and think he has found his savior. He will walk right into the slaughterhouse." I spun the onyx ring on my finger. The game had begun. The pawn had crossed the board, and she was now the queen, and the first move was mine. New York City does not just smell money. It hunts for it. The moment Archon Capital announced its arrival with a press release that was deliberately vague and dripping with implied power, the city's elite went into a frenzy. We did not just open an office. We declared a new era. The headlines were hysterical. "Who is Ms. V, the trillion-dollar mystery, the new queen of Wall Street?" They called me a mystery. I was not a mystery. I was a mirror, reflecting their own greed back at them. The invitations to the Archon inaugural gala were printed on matte black metal cards with gold leaf lettering. We sent out exactly 200. By noon on the day of the event, the secondary market price for a +1 ticket had reached $50,000. The venue was the Obsidian Tower's Grand Ballroom, a space suspended 80 floors above Manhattan, with glass walls that made you feel like you were floating in the night sky. I stood in my private dressing room, staring at the woman in the mirror. Verity Cross would have worn a modest pastel dress, something that blended into the wallpaper. V wore a custom gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged every curve like a second skin, with a slit that ran dangerously high up the thigh. My neck was draped in diamonds, cold, hard, and sharp, but the most important piece was the mask. It was a masterpiece of Venetian craftsmanship. Covered in black feathers and crystals, covering the upper half of my face, it hid the eyes that used to cry over burnt toast. It left only my mouth exposed, a mouth painted a deep, blood red. "They are arriving," Damon's voice came through the intercom. "The Thorne party just cleared security. Julian looks like he's walking to the gallows. And Beatrice looks like she is ready to sell him to the executioner if the price is right." "And Tiffany?" I asked, adjusting the onyx ring on my finger. "Drunk," Damon replied. "She started on the champagne in the limo." "Perfect," I said. "Let the show begin." I waited 20 minutes. In high society, punctuality is for the help. Power arrives when it wants to. When I finally stepped onto the grand staircase that descended into the ballroom, the room went silent. The conversations died. The clinking of crystal stopped. 200 heads turned upward. I saw the hunger in their eyes. They did not see a woman. They saw a bank vault waiting to be cracked. I descended slowly, my hand gliding over the railing. I scanned the crowd, and my gaze landed on them instantly. They were huddled near the champagne fountain, a cluster of desperation in designer clothes. Julian looked older than his 33 years. His face was drawn. Lines of stress etched deep around his mouth. The Nebula project and the mounting debts were eating him alive. Next to him stood Tiffany Sterling. She looked disheveled, her expensive dress slightly askew, a glass of champagne clutched in her hand like a lifeline. She was swaying slightly, and there was Beatrice, my mother-in-law. She stood straight as a rod, her eyes darting around the room like a hawk looking for a mouse. She looked terrified, but she masked it with a veneer of snobbery that was cracking at the edges. I reached the bottom of the stairs, and the sharks began to circle. I navigated the crowd with the grace Damon had beaten into me, accepting compliments, nodding at billionaires, but never stopping. I was making a beeline for my prey. As I approached their circle, Beatrice nudged Julian violently. "She is coming here. Straighten your tie. Do not look desperate." I stopped 5 feet away from them, up close. The smell of their fear was almost intoxicating. It smelled like stale sweat and heavy cologne. "Good evening," I said. My voice was low, modulated, stripped of the soft cadence Verity used to have. It was the voice of a woman who owned the oxygen in the room. Julian turned, and for a second, I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He tilted his head, looking at my mouth, my chin. The familiarity was there, scratching at the back of his mind, but he dismissed it instantly. Verity was a mouse who shopped at thrift stores. The woman standing before him was a titan draped in diamonds. The cognitive dissonance protected me better than the mask ever could. "Ms. V," Julian said, stepping forward and extending his hand. His palm was damp. "It is an honor. I am Julian Thorne, Chief Operating Officer of the Sterling Group." I took his hand. It felt weak. "I know who you are. Mr. Thorne, your name has crossed my desk. The Nebula project, is it not?" His eyes lit up with hope. "You have heard of it. It is going to revolutionize the energy sector. We are actually looking for strategic partners to take it to the next level." "Strategic partners," I repeated, tasting the lie. "Or a lifeline." Julian's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, dropping his voice to that intimate, husky tone he used to use on me when he wanted forgiveness for coming home late. "A visionary always needs a muse," he said, his eyes raking over my dress. "Or a patron, I must say. The press releases do not do you justice. You are captivating." I suppressed the urge to vomit. He was flirting with me. His wife was standing 3 feet away, and he was practically undressing me with his eyes because he thought I was his checkbook. "And you are bold, Mr. Thorne," I said, allowing a small, amused smile to play on my lips. "Flirting with a stranger while your wife watches, that is a dangerous game." Julian glanced back at Tiffany, who was busy arguing with a waiter about the refill of her glass. He turned back to me with a dismissive shrug. "My wife does not understand the complexities of business, or the needs of a man like me. We have grown apart." "Is that so?" I asked. "I heard the Sterling-Thorne merger was a fairy tale." "Fairy tales are for children," Julian said, leaning in. "I am interested in reality, and looking at you, reality seems very promising." He was disgusting, and he was perfect. "I appreciate a man who knows what he wants," I said, letting my fingers brush lightly against the sleeve of his jacket. He shuddered. "Perhaps we can discuss Nebula later. I have a private office upstairs." "I would make time for that," he said quickly. "Any time." Before he could say more, Beatrice elbowed her way into the conversation. She pushed Julian aside slightly, desperate to get her share of the spotlight. "Ms. V," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I am Beatrice Thorne, Julian's mother. It is so lovely to meet a woman in a position of such power. It is rare to see." Mrs. Thorne, I nodded. I have heard you are the matriarch behind the throne. Oh, I try to guide him, she said, casting a withering look at Tiffany. Lord knows he needs it. He certainly does not get any support at home. She lowered her voice, leaning in as if we were old friends sharing a secret. You see that girl Tiffany useless? Absolutely useless. A spoiled brat who thinks the world owes her a living. She drinks, she spends, and she embarrasses us. I raised an eyebrow behind my mask. I thought she was the heiress to the sterling fortune. Money does not buy class, Beatrice sniffed. Or utility. Julian needs a partner, someone strong, someone like you. I always told him he settled too quickly. He needs a woman who can build an empire, not just spend one. The irony was so sharp it almost cut me. 5 years ago, she had called me a parasite and Tiffany a queen. Now, because the money had run out, Tiffany was the parasite and I, the stranger with the checkbook, was the ideal daughter-in-law. You seem very pragmatic, Mrs. Thorne, I said. I am a realist, she replied. If you are considering investing in Nebula, know that Julian is the brilliance behind it. The sterling name is just a label. We are ready to move on from them. We just need the right opportunity. She was selling out her daughter-in-law and her son's boss in the middle of a ballroom. 5 minutes after meeting me, I am looking for bold investments, I said, loud enough for Julian to hear. Archon Capital has allocated $10 billion for American acquisitions, but we only bet on winners. I need to know that the leadership is flexible. I am very flexible, Julian said, stepping back in. I can make things happen that the Sterling board is too afraid to touch. I like the sound of that, I said. Meet me in my office tomorrow morning at 9. Bring the financials. And Julian. Yes. He looked like a puppy waiting for a treat. Come alone, I said. I do not like crowded rooms. He grinned, a predatory, arrogant grin that made my skin crawl. I wouldn't dream of bringing anyone else. At that moment, Tiffany stumbled over. She grabbed Julian's arm to steady herself, nearly spilling her wine on my dress. Who is this? Jules? She slurred, squinting at me. Another one of your consultants. Julian ripped his arm away, his face twisting in disgust. Tiffany, pull yourself together. You are drunk. I am not drunk, she snapped, then glared at me. Why are you wearing a mask? What are you hiding? Is she hiding something? Jules, is she ugly under there? Tiffany, Beatrice hissed. Shut your mouth. It is a masquerade. Mrs. Thorne, I said calmly. We all wear masks. Some are just more visible than others. I looked at Julian. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock. I will be there, he promised, ignoring his wife completely. I turned and walked away, the velvet of my dress trailing on the floor. I felt their eyes on my back. Julian's lust, Beatrice's greed, Tiffany's jealousy. It was a toxic cocktail, and I had just stirred it. I signaled the security team to clear a path to the private elevator. I ascended back to the penthouse, leaving the noise of the party behind. The doors to the private suite opened. The room was quiet, lit only by the city lights outside. Damon was sitting on the leather sofa, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. He watched as I walked to the center of the room. My hands went to the back of my head. I undid the clasp of the mask. The heavy, feathered thing came off. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air on my face. I walked over to the table and dropped the mask. It landed with a soft thud next to the dossier on the Sterling Group. I took the glass Damon offered me and downed half of it in one burn. Well? Damon asked. He hit on me, I said, staring at the amber liquid in my glass. He tried to sell me his company and his marriage in under 5 minutes, and Beatrice called Tiffany a useless parasite. Damon let out a low chuckle. Predictable. It was worse than predictable, I said, walking to the window and looking down at the tiny figures leaving the building. It was pathetic. They have no loyalty, no honor. They're just empty shells. always searching for the next place to attach themselves. And did they recognize you? No, I said. They looked right at me. Julian looked into my eyes. He saw the money, not the woman. He doesn't see people. Damon, he never did. He only sees value propositions. I turned back to him, a cold smile spreading across my face. He thinks he seduced me. He thinks he's going to walk in here tomorrow and secure $1 billion check that will save his career and free him from his marriage. And what will he get? Damon asked. He's going to get exactly what he asked for, I said softly. A chance to prove who he really is without realizing the terms are his own. I set the glass down. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The fish has taken the bait, I said. Now we let him pull until he tightens the knot himself. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a guillotine blade dropping into place. I stood in the command center of Archon Capital, looking out at the gray, weeping sky over Manhattan. The city looked peaceful from 80 floors up, but down in the trenches of the financial district, I was about to detonate a bomb. Status on the sterling debt packages, I asked, not turning away from the window. Damon sat at the main terminal, his fingers flying across a haptic keyboard. Apex Holdings has consolidated the loans. The Sterling Group owes Vanguard Private Bank a total of $350 million in short-term operational credit. The maturity date is technically next month, but we found a clause. The Material Adverse Change Clause, I said, reciting the trap I had laid months ago. Clause 14b. If the lender suspects the borrower's liquidity has dropped below 15% of operating costs, the lender has the right to demand immediate repayment of the full principal. Their liquidity is currently at 12% because of the cash they dumped into your fake Nebula project, Damon confirmed. We have them. Execute the margin call, I ordered. Send the demand letter. Give them 24 hours to pay the full $350 million. Damon hit the enter key. It was a silent keystroke, but it echoed in my ears like a gunshot. The chaos was immediate. At 9:30 in the morning, the courier delivered the demand letter to the executive suite of the Sterling Group. By 10 o'clock, panic had set in. I watched the fallout through a hacked feed of the Sterling boardroom security camera, a little trick Damon had installed during a maintenance visit weeks prior. Marcus Sterling, the Lion of Wall Street, was pacing the room, his face a dangerous shade of purple. Julian sat at the table, pale and sweating, looking like a child who had broken a vase. How did this happen? Marcus roared, slamming his fist on the mahogany table. Vanguard has been our partner for 20 years. Why are they calling the loan now? I don't know, sir, Julian stammered. I tried to call the bank president. He said ownership changed hands last week. They are under new management. Find the money, Marcus screamed. Liquidate the assets. Sell the shipping division. We can't, Julian whispered. We leveraged the shipping division to fund Nebula. Marcus froze. He turned to look at his son-in-law, his eyes bulging with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, to likely fire Julian on the spot, but no sound came out. Instead, Marcus Sterling grasped his left arm. His face went slack on one side. He collapsed onto the carpet with a heavy thud. Dad! Tiffany's voice shrieked from the doorway as she ran in. I watched dispassionately as paramedics swarmed the office. Marcus was carried out on a stretcher. He was alive, but the stroke was massive. The lion was toothless. By noon, the board of directors had held an emergency vote. With Marcus incapacitated, the bylaws were clear. The chief operating officer stepped up. Julian Thorne was now the acting CEO of a company that was bleeding to death. He sat in Marcus's chair, looking small and terrified. The phone on his desk was ringing incessantly. Creditors, shareholders, the press. I let him marinate in the fear for 3 hours. Then, I had my surveillance team switch the audio feed to his cell phone. Mother, I don't know what to do, Julian was whispering into the phone. They want $300 million by tomorrow. We have maybe 40. The stock is tanking. The board is going to crucify me. Beatrice Thorne's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and venomous. Stop whining. Julian, this is your moment. You wanted the crown, now you have to wear it. I'm going to lose everything, he sobbed. If the company defaults, I'm personally liable for the Nebula guarantees. We will lose the house. We will be destitute. Think, you idiot, Beatrice hissed. Who has that kind of money? Who looked at you like you were the only man in the room last night? There was a pause. Ms. V. She manages a $10 billion fund, Beatrice said. She is looking for acquisitions. She liked you. Julian, I saw the way she touched your arm. I saw the way she looked at you. You are a thorn. You are charming. You are handsome. Go to her. She is a businesswoman. Mother. She will want to see the books. She is a woman, Beatrice corrected. And you are a man who knows how to make women feel special. It worked on Tiffany, didn't it? You made that spoiled brat believe she was the love of your life until you got the ring on her finger. Do it again. Seduce her. Julian, get her to sign a loan extension. Use your body if you have to. Just save the money. I cut the feed. I sat back in my chair, a cold smile touching my lips. Beatrice was consistent to the end. She would pimp out her own son to save her lifestyle. While Julian was receiving his marching orders from his mother, his wife was busy digging her own escape tunnel. I shifted my attention to the report coming in from my private investigator, a former Mossad agent named Cohen. He had been tailing Tiffany Sterling for weeks. Subject is at the Van Cleef vault, Cohen reported. She just emptied her safety deposit box. Diamonds, bonds, her grandmother's emeralds. She is moving fast. Where is she going? I asked. She has a meeting at the St. Regis Hotel in 30 minutes, Cohen said. Room 402, with Carter Banks. I raised an eyebrow. Carter Banks was the CEO of Ironwood Capital, Sterling's biggest rival. He was a shark who had been trying to dismantle the Sterling empire for a decade. She is selling out, I realized. She knows the ship is sinking, and she is stealing the lifeboats. Send the location to Julian, I ordered Cohen. An anonymous tip. Tell him his wife is liquidating marital assets and meeting a competitor. I wanted them to tear each other apart. Julian received the text message at 4 p.m. He was already on edge, terrified of the meeting he was trying to schedule with me. Terrified of the bankruptcy lawyers waiting in the lobby, the message was the spark in the powder keg. He stormed out of the Sterling building and drove to the street. Regis, I did not need a camera inside the hotel room. The audio recording from Tiffany's phone, which we had cloned days ago, was enough. I listened as Julian kicked the door open. What is this? Julian screamed. Tiffany, what are you doing? Lower your voice, you moron, Tiffany snapped. You are embarrassing me. Carter. Julian's voice was full of betrayal. You are meeting with Carter Banks, and what is in that bag? Is that the jewelry that is community property? It is my property, Tiffany yelled back. My father bought it. My family earned it. You are just the hired help who got lucky. I am your husband. I am the CEO. You are the acting CEO of a corpse. Tiffany laughed. A cruel, drunken sound. I saw the demand letter. Julian, I have friends in accounting. The company is dead. You killed it with your stupid Nebula project. Do you think I am going to go down with you? I am a Sterling. I survive. So you are sleeping with him, Julian accused. With the enemy. Carter has offered to buy the Asian shipping routes for 10 cents on the dollar, Tiffany said coldly. And yes, he is also offering me a penthouse in London and a life where I don't have to listen to your mother complain about my spending. I never loved you. Julian, I loved that you were manageable. But now you are just a liability. There was the sound of a struggle, a slap, a crash of glass. Get out, Tiffany screamed. I am filing for divorce in the morning and I am taking whatever is left. Julian fled the hotel. He had lost his father-in-law's protection. He had lost his wife. He had lost his dignity. He was alone, just like I had been, while the Thorne-Sterling marriage disintegrated in a hotel room. I was on the trading floor of Archon, executing the final phase of the siege. News of Marcus's stroke and the rumored liquidity crisis had hit the wire. The Sterling Group stock, STR, was in freefall. It had opened at $80 a share. By 3 in the afternoon, it was trading at 30. "The market is panicking," Damon said, his face illuminated by the red wall of numbers. "Everyone is selling. Institutional investors are dumping their portfolios." "Buy it," I said softly. "All of it. Every single share that hits the market," I commanded. "Use the dark pools so they don't see who is buying. Keep the price suppressed, but soak up the volume." Archon Capital began to feed. We bought millions of shares as they plummeted. We bought from the pension funds. We bought from the hedge funds. We bought from the terrified retail investors. By the time the closing bell rang at 4 o'clock, the Sterling Group had lost 60% of its market value, and Archon Capital secretly owned 35% of the company. We were the largest single shareholder. We owned the debt. We owned the stock. We owned them. Julian returned to the Sterling office at 5 o'clock. He looked like a man who had walked through a war zone. His tie was crooked, his cheek was scratched, and his eyes were hollow. He sat at his desk, staring at the ticker tape that showed the destruction of his family's legacy. The $350 million loan was due at 9 the next morning. He had no wife to bail him out. He had no father-in-law to fix it. He picked up the phone and dialed my number. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "This is the office of the chairwoman," my assistant answered. "Please," Julian's voice was cracking. "This is Julian Thorne. I met Miss V last night. I need to speak with her. It is a matter of life and death." "Miss V is in a meeting," the assistant said coolly. "She cannot be disturbed. Tell her I have a proposal. Tell her I can give her anything she wants. Please." My assistant put him on hold and looked at me. I sat in my leather chair, sipping a glass of sparkling water. "He is begging," she said. "Let him wait," I said. "Let him sweat for another hour." I waited until 6 o'clock. The sun had set, and the city was a grid of lights. Julian was likely sitting in the dark, watching the clock tick down to his destruction. I opened my laptop. I typed a single email, no subject line, just a message, to JTHORNESTERLINGGROUP.com from VARCHONCAPITAL.com. "Mr. Thorne, I am aware of your liquidity crisis. I am aware that Vanguard has called your loans. I am also aware that your largest competitor is currently negotiating with your wife to carve up your assets. There is no loan extension. I do not throw good money after bad. However, there is an exit. Archon Capital is willing to purchase the controlling interest in the Sterling Group. We will assume the debt. We will inject the necessary capital to prevent bankruptcy. The price is non-negotiable. $1 per share for your personal holdings and the board's resignation. You have until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to accept. If you refuse, I will let the bank seize the assets, and you will be personally liable for the $400 million in guaranteed debt. You will go to prison for trading while insolvent. Sell me the company, Julian, or lose everything. V. I hit send. I imagined the notification pinging on his phone in the silent office. I imagined him reading it, his hope turning to ash. $1 per share. I was offering to buy his life's work for the price of a pack of gum. He would take it. He had no choice. He was a coward, and cowards always choose survival over honor. Damon walked in, reading the email over my shoulder. "Brutal," he commented. "You are forcing him to sign his own death warrant." "No," I said, standing up and walking to the window. "I am just handing him the pen. He wrote the warrant 5 years ago when he threw me out in the rain. He will come here tomorrow," Damon warned. "He will try one last time to charm you. He thinks Ms. V is attracted to him." "Let him come," I said, my eyes reflecting the cold lights of the city. "I want him to see who exactly is buying his soul." I touched the cold glass of the window. The reflection showed a woman who looked nothing like Verity Cross, but inside, The heart was beating with the same rhythm. Tick, tock, the time for justice had arrived. Tomorrow, the mask would come off, and the monster would finally see the face of the one who ate him. A rat, when cornered, will bite. A cockroach will scuttle. Julian Thorne, however, did something far more sophisticated. He negotiated. The email I had sent him was the bait, and he swallowed it whole. At 7 o'clock that morning, an hour before the deadline, my phone buzzed. It was not a plea for mercy, it was a request for a secure line. "He wants to talk," Damon said, monitoring the communications array. "But he insisted on speaking to a legal representative first. He's trying to cut a side deal." "Patch him through to Harrison," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Let the old wolf play with the puppy." I listened in on the encrypted channel. Julian's voice was remarkably steady for a man whose life was imploding. It was the steadiness of a sociopath who had decided that survival was the only moral imperative. "Mr. Harrison," Julian said smoothly, "I have received the offer from Miss V. $1 per share is insulting. However, I understand the leverage you hold. I am willing to facilitate the sale of the controlling interest, but I have conditions." "You are not in a position to make demands, Mr. Thorne," Harrison replied, his voice dry as dust. "I think I am," Julian countered. "You want the company clean. You want a swift takeover without a protracted legal battle with the remaining board members. I can give you that. I can deliver the board's resignation. But in exchange, I want 2 things. Name them." "First," Julian said, "I retain my position as CEO. The Sterling Group needs a familiar face during the transition. I know the operations better than anyone." I stifled a laugh. He was delusional. He had driven the company into the ground, yet he still believed he was indispensable. "And the second?" Harrison asked. "I want immunity," Julian said, his voice dropping lower. "There are irregularities in the accounting, specifically regarding the pension funds and the offshore accounts my father-in-law, Marcus Sterling, set up. If the SEC investigates, I want to be clear that those were Marcus's directives, not mine." "You want to turn state's witness against your own family?" Harrison asked, the disdain palpable even over the phone. "They aren't my family," Julian said quickly. "My wife has filed for divorce. Her father is incapacitated. I am simply a professional trying to do the right thing for the shareholders." "The right thing," Harrison repeated. "Very well. If you can provide physical evidence of Marcus Sterling's embezzlement documents that prove the fraud originated with him, we will consider a retention package for you as CEO, and we will shield you from the initial fallout." "I have the files," Julian said instantly. "I made copies years ago, just in case." "Bring them to the signing," Harrison said. "Tonight, 8 o'clock. The call ended. I looked at Damon. "He had a just-in-case file on his own father-in-law," Damon said, shaking his head. "He was planning this betrayal long before you showed up." "He is a parasite," I said. "He attaches himself to a host, drains it dry, and then looks for the next warm body. He thinks Archon is the new host." "Are we going to give him the immunity?" "We are going to give him a rope," I said. "Record everything." While Julian was busy selling out the Sterlings, Beatrice Thorne was busy counting chickens that had not only not hatched, but were already dead. My surveillance team had bugged the Thorne penthouse. I listened to the audio feed as Beatrice paced her living room, clinking a glass of morning sherry. "It is brilliant, Julian," she exclaimed. "Absolutely brilliant. You sell the shell of the company to this Miss V, get rid of the debt, and keep your job. We will be working for $1 trillion fund. Imagine the connections. Imagine the salary." "I don't know, Mother," Julian's voice came through, sounding less confident than he had with Harrison. "Tiffany is going to be furious. If I hand over those files, her father goes to prison. Even if he is in a coma, they will freeze all the family assets. She will be destitute." "Good," Beatrice shouted. "Let her rot. That girl looked down on us for 5 years. She treated you like a trophy husband. She threw wine on your anniversary dinner. Remember, she deserves everything she gets." It was fascinating to hear her rewrite history. 5 years ago, she had cheered as Tiffany humiliated me. Now, Tiffany was the villain, and Julian was the victim. Beatrice's loyalty had the shelf life of milk. "Besides," Beatrice continued, her voice softening into a purr, "once you are established as the CEO of the Archon subsidiary, you can get close to Miss V. She is single, Julian, and she is clearly interested. Imagine, Julian Thorne, husband of the richest woman in the world. She is intense." "Mother," Julian said, "there is something about her. She scares me a little." "Power is always scary. Darling, that is what makes it sexy. Just sign the papers. Give them the evidence on Marcus. Cut the dead weight. We are Thorns. We survive." "Okay," Julian said. "I'll do it. I'm meeting her tonight." The trap was set, but I needed one more player on the stage. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had secured from the police database. "Detective Miller," a gruff voice answered. "Economic Crimes Unit." "Detective," I said, using a voice modulator that made me sound like a nervous male informant. "I have information regarding the embezzlement at the Sterling Group. I have proof that Tiffany Sterling is currently attempting to launder stolen corporate funds through a jewelry sale." "Who is this?" "A concerned shareholder," I said. "If you want the evidence, go to the Archon Capital headquarters tonight at 8:30. The CEO, Julian Thorne, will be handing over the incriminating documents, and I believe his wife will be trying to flee the country." "We will be there," Miller said. I hung up. At 6 o'clock, the news broke. Based on the anonymous tip I had provided earlier and the digital trail of breadcrumbs Damon had planted, the FBI raided the Sterling estate. They didn't find Marcus. He was still in the hospital, but they found the offshore accounts. Tiffany Sterling was arrested at JFK Airport, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with a carry-on bag full of diamonds. I watched the footage on the news in my office. Tiffany looked disheveled, screaming at the paparazzi, her hands cuffed behind her back. "Do you know who I am?" she was yelling. "My husband is the CEO. Call Julian. He will fix this." I muted the TV. Julian wasn't going to fix anything. He was about to hand over the nail for her coffin. At 7:55, the elevator to the penthouse chimed. I sat in the high-backed leather chair at the end of the long conference table. The room was dimly lit, the city lights providing the only illumination. I was turned away from the door, looking out at the skyline. "Mr. Thorne and Mrs. Thorne," my assistant announced. Beatrice had come too. Of course she had. She wouldn't miss the moment of her son's triumph. I heard their footsteps on the polished floor. They stopped halfway down the table. "Ms. V." Julian's voice called out. It was confident, almost swaggering. He thought he had won. I did not turn around yet. "Please, sit," I said. My voice was amplified by the room's acoustics. Surrounding them, I heard the scrape of chairs. "We brought the documents," Julian said. "Everything you asked for, the pension fund transfers, the Cayman accounts, the forged audit reports. It proves that Marcus Sterling orchestrated the fraud from the beginning. My signature is on some of them, but only as a witness. I was following orders." "And the board?" I asked. "Resignations are signed," Julian said. "You have a clean slate. The Sterling Group is yours. All I need is the countersignature on my employment contract and the immunity agreement. And the check," Beatrice added, "for the shares, even at $1 a share. Julian holds 2 million shares. That is $2 million. A nice signing bonus. $2 million. They were selling a $1 billion legacy for $2 million and a job title. "You are very efficient, Julian," I said. "You betrayed your wife, your father-in-law, and your board in less than 12 hours. That is a rare talent." "It is business," Julian said defensively. "Survival of the fittest." "Indeed," I said. "Survival." I slowly spun the chair around. I was wearing a white suit, stark, blinding white. It was the same shade of white as the dress I had worn 5 years ago, but this suit was tailored, sharp, and cost $50,000. My hair was slicked back, my face was bare of the mask, but my expression was stone. Julian blinked. He squinted slightly. The recognition was there, swimming in his subconscious. But his conscious mind refused to accept it. He saw Ms. V, the billionaire. He did not see Verity. "Is something wrong, Mr. Thorne?" I asked, arching a brow. "No," he stammered. You remind me of someone. It is uncanny." "Everyone reminds us of someone," I said, enigmatic. "Let's proceed." Damon stepped out from the shadows, placing a thick stack of documents in front of Julian. "This is the acquisition agreement," Damon said. "It transfers 100% of the Sterling Group assets to Archon Capital. It also contains your employment contract as consultant." "Consultant," Julian frowned. "We agreed on CEO." "It is a formality," Beatrice interjected quickly, kicking Julian under the table. "Titles can be changed later. Just sign it. Julian, we need the money." Julian hesitated, reading the cover page. "And the immunity." "Section 5, Damon said. "It states that Archon Capital will not pursue legal action against you for prior mismanagement." Julian nodded, relieved. He picked up the gold pen lying on the table. "Wait," I said. Julian froze, the pen hovering over the paper. "Before you sign," I said, leaning forward, "I want to hear you say it. I want to hear you admit what you did to Marcus and Tiffany." I don't understand," Julian said. "Humor me," I said. "Tell me that you are willingly handing over evidence that will send your father-in-law to prison and leave your wife penniless. In exchange for your own safety." Julian looked at Beatrice. She nodded encouragingly. "Yes," Julian said, his voice gaining strength. "Marcus was corrupt. Tiffany was unfaithful and reckless. They deserve what is coming. I am the only one who tried to save this company. I am doing this for me, for my future." "For your future," I repeated. "Excellent." I pressed a button on the underside of the table. A small red light on the wall blinked off. The recording was saved. "Sign it," I commanded. Julian signed with a flourish. Beatrice beamed, clapping her hands together softly. "Done," Julian said, sliding the papers back. "So, when do we announce the acquisition? I should probably draft a press release about my new role." "There will be a press release," I said, standing up. "But not the one you think." I picked up the file Julian had brought the evidence against Marcus. "This is very thorough," I said, flipping through it. "It proves Marcus was stealing, but it also proves you knew about it for 3 years and did nothing." "But I have immunity," Julian said, standing up. The contract says Archon Capital will not sue you." I interrupted. "It says nothing about the district attorney." At that moment, the double doors of the conference room burst open. Detective Miller and 4 uniformed officers walked in. "Julian Thorne," Miller barked. Julian's face went white. "What? Who called you?" "We received a tip," Miller said, walking over and grabbing Julian's arm. "And we just heard a very interesting confession." "Confession." Julian looked at me. You recorded it." "Section 5, I said calmly. "Read the fine print." Julian. "Archon cooperates fully with law enforcement in cases of criminal fraud." "But we had a deal," Beatrice shrieked, standing up and trying to push the officer away. "He is the CEO. You can't arrest him, he just sold the company." "He sold the company," I agreed. "Which means the company is now mine. And as the new owner, my first act is to clean house." I looked at Julian, who was being cuffed. His eyes were wide, filled with a dawn of horror. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you do this? You have the company. Why destroy me?" I walked around the table until I was standing inches from him. I looked deep into his eyes, letting the facade drop just enough. "Because, Julian," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "Ambition is bigger than love, remember." He froze, his breath hitched. The The exact words he had said to me 5 years ago when he threw his ring into the wine glass. He stared at me, really stared at me. And this time, the money didn't blind him. This time, he saw the ghost. "Verity," he breathed. The word was barely a sound. Beatrice heard it. She spun around, staring at me with her mouth open. "What? That's impossible. She's dead. She's gone." "Take them away," I said to the officers. "They are trespassing." "No!" Julian screamed as they dragged him toward the door. "Verity, wait. We can talk. I didn't know it was you." "That is the point. Julian," I said, turning my back on him. "You never knew me." The doors slammed shut. The room was silent again. Damon walked over and picked up the signed contract. "You own it," he said. "The Sterling Group, the Thorne estate, the debt, everything." "Not everything," I said, looking at the empty chairs where they had sat. "Not yet." I walked to the window. The police cars were flashing red and blue down on the street, loading Julian and Beatrice into the back. They thought this was the end. They thought prison was the punishment. They were wrong. Prison was just the waiting room. The real punishment was realizing that the hand that fed them the poison was the same hand they had bitten 5 years ago. "Prepare the final phase," I told Damon. "Tomorrow, we go to the house." The elevator ride to the 88th floor of the Obsidian Tower takes exactly 45 seconds. I knew this because I had timed it. I sat in the high-backed leather executive chair, positioned at the far end of the boardroom, my back turned to the heavy double doors. Before me, the floor-to-ceiling glass wall offered a panoramic view of New York City at night, a sprawling grid of electricity and ambition that looked deceptively peaceful from this height. The room was silent, save for the hum of the climate control system and the rhythmic tapping of my own finger against the armrest. I was not wearing the midnight blue velvet from the gala. Tonight, I wore a suit of blinding, pristine white. It was tailored to within a millimeter of perfection, the fabric crisp and sharp, a deliberate echo of the stained white dress I had worn the night my life ended 5 years ago. But where that dress had been a symbol of my naivety and domestic servitude, this suit was armor. It was the color of a funeral shroud. And tonight, I was burying the past. The intercom on the massive oak conference table beeped softly. "They are here, ma'am." My assistant's voice whispered, "Mr. Julian Thorne and Mrs. Beatrice Thorne." "Send them in," I commanded, my voice steady, betraying not a tremor of the hurricane raging inside my chest. "And ensure the soundproofing is active. I do not want any disturbances." "Yes, ma'am." I heard the heavy doors hiss open. The click-clack of heels on the polished marble floor echoed through the vast cavern of the room, followed by the heavier, confident stride of a man who believes he has just pulled off the greatest heist of his career. "Good God," I heard Beatrice whisper, her voice dripping with awe and greed. "Look at this view. Julian, you can see the entire city. This is real power." "It fits," Julian replied, his tone smug. "This is where we belong. Mother, not begging for scraps at Sterling, but here, at the top." They moved deeper into the room. I did not turn. I remained a silhouette against the city lights, a mystery they were desperate to solve and exploit. "Ms. V," Julian called out. His voice was smoother than it had been on the phone, polished with the oil of false charm. "We are here, and as requested, we came alone." I raised my hand, a silent gesture for them to sit. I heard the scrape of the chairs being pulled out at the opposite end of the long table. They were seated 20 feet away from me. The distance was calculated. I wanted them to feel small. I wanted them to shout their betrayals across the void so that the echoes would ring in their own ears. "I trust the security downstairs treated you with respect," I asked, keeping my back to them, staring at the reflection of the Chrysler Building. "Oh, impeccable," Beatrice answered quickly. "Very professional. Unlike the staff at the Sterling Building, they have been so rude lately. Panic does terrible things to the working class, doesn't it? It does, I agreed. And you brought the documents. Right here, Julian said. I could hear the slap of a heavy folder hitting the table. Full disclosure, the pension fund embezzlement, the offshore tax evasion schemes, the falsified audit reports. It is all there, enough to put Marcus Sterling away for 20 years, and enough to ensure that Tiffany's assets are frozen by the federal government immediately. You are very efficient. Julian, I said, allowing a touch of admiration to color my tone. Most men would hesitate to destroy their own family. They are not my family, Julian corrected instantly, his voice hardening. They were business partners, and bad ones at that. Marcus was reckless. Tiffany was a liability. I was drowning. Ms. V, I was the only one trying to keep the ship afloat. When the captain is drunk and the first mate is stealing the cargo, the only responsible thing to do is mutiny. Is that what you call it? I asked. Mutiny. I call it leadership, Julian said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I call it demonstrating the kind of ruthless pragmatism that a firm like Archon Capital requires. You need someone who can make the hard calls, someone who isn't burdened by sentimental attachments. Sentiment is a weakness, Beatrice chimed in. I have always told him that. Julian is a visionary. Ms. V. He has been held back for years by lesser people, first by that awful orphanage girl he married out of pity, and then by the Sterlings who treated him like a glorified assistant. He deserves a platform like this. He deserves to be your right hand. My finger stopped tapping. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The orphanage girl, I repeated slowly. You mean his first wife? Oh, please, let's not call her a wife, Beatrice scoffed. She was a charity case. Verity, a mousy little thing, no ambition, no style, no spine. Julian married her because he was young and has a savior complex. He thought he could mold her, but you can't polish dust. She was dead weight. We had to cut her loose just to let him breathe. She didn't understand this world, Julian added, his tone dismissive, as if he were talking about a pet that had run away. She thought love was enough. She didn't understand that in our world. Love is just another currency, and she was bankrupt. I see, I said. And you? Julian, are you solvent? With this deal? Julian laughed. I am more than solvent. I am unleashed. Ms. V. Look at what I did in 12 hours. I dismantled a legacy company, secured the evidence to jail my competition, and negotiated a takeover by the largest fund on the planet. Imagine what I can do for you. I don't just want to be a consultant. I want to be your partner. I want to help you rule this city. He paused, and the silence stretched. I could feel his anticipation radiating across the room. He was waiting for me to turn around, to validate him, to welcome him into the fold of the untouchables. You want to be my partner, I mused. You want to stand by my side. I think we would make a formidable team, Julian said, his voice dropping to a seductive register. I feel a connection, Ms. V. I felt it last night at the gala. You and I, we are the same. We are survivors. Survivors, I whispered. I stood up slowly. The movement was fluid, deliberate. I smoothed the front of my white jacket. I took a deep breath, inhaling the sterile, expensive air of the office, and exhaled the last remnants of Verity Cross. You are right. Julian, I said, my voice ringing clear and cold. We are survivors, but you are wrong about one thing. What is that? He asked. You didn't cut me loose, I said. You buried me, and you forgot that seeds grow. I turned. The motion was not dramatic. It was simple. I pivoted on my heel and faced them. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, no reaction, just the blank processing of visual data. Julian was sitting forward in his chair, a confident smile plastered on his face. Beatrice was reaching for a glass of water, looking bored. Then, the data hit the brain. I saw Julian's smile freeze. It didn't fade. It just stopped, like a video paused on a glitch. His eyes, which had been scanning my body with lust, snapped up to my face. They widened and widened. The color drained from his skin so fast it looked like he had been bled dry in a second. Beatrice dropped the glass. It hit the marble table with a sharp crack, spilling water over the expensive leather folder, but neither of them noticed. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. I stood there, bathed in the soft, recessed lighting, looking down at them with eyes that were ancient and cold. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply existed. "Hello, Julian," I said. "Happy anniversary." The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. "No," Julian whispered. It was a sound of pure denial. "No, no, that's impossible." "Is it?" I asked, taking a slow step toward the table. "Is it impossible? Or is it just inconvenient?" "You're dead," Beatrice croaked, clutching her pearls as if they could protect her. You were a nobody. You had nothing. We threw you out. You're gone." "I was thrown out," I agreed, taking another step. "In the rain, with a broken suitcase and $200. Do you remember, Beatrice? You told me I would die in the gutter. You told me I was a bad investment." I reached the end of the table. I placed my hands flat on the polished wood, leaning in. "Look at me," I commanded. Julian was shaking, visibly shaking. He looked from my face to the white suit, and the memory overlapped with the reality, the stain of the red wine, the rain, the mud. "Verity," he choked out. The name sounded foreign on his tongue. A ghost story he was afraid to tell. "Verity is dead," I said softly. "You killed her. You and your mother and your mistress. You killed the girl who cooked your meals and ironed your shirts. You killed the girl who loved you." I straightened up, towering over them. "I am V, and I am the one who bought your debt. I am the one who crashed your stock. I am the one who sent the police to your wife, and I am the one who just bought your soul for $1 a share." Julian scrambled back, his chair screeching against the floor. He looked around the room as if searching for a camera, for a prankster, for an exit, but there was only glass and the night sky. This is a trap," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "You set me up, the Nebula Project, the bank. All me," I confirmed. "I played you, Julian, just like you played me, only I played for keeps." But I signed the papers," he shouted, pointing at the wet folder. "I gave you everything you promised immunity. I promised that Archon Capital would not sue you." I said. "I never said I wouldn't destroy you." Beatrice stood up, her face a mask of fury and terror. "You vengeful little bitch, you can't do this. We are the Thorns. You can't just—" "Sit down," I roared. The sound cracked like a whip. Beatrice collapsed back into her chair, stunned into silence. I had never raised my voice at her in 5 years. The force of it pinned her to the seat. "You are nothing," I told her, my voice dropping back to a lethal whisper. "You are a bankrupt socialite sitting in a building you don't own, wearing jewelry you can't afford, begging a woman you despised for a job you aren't qualified for." I looked at Julian. He was staring at me with a mixture of horror and a twisted, desperate hope. "Verity," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Baby, please, I know I made mistakes, but it was the pressure. It was my mother. It was Tiffany. I never stopped loving you. You know that. Right deep down. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Stop," I said. "Just stop. You are embarrassing yourself. And honestly, it is boring. I didn't bring you here for an apology. Julian, I don't want your regret." "Then what do you want?" he whispered. Tears streaming down his face. Tears of fear, not remorse. I walked around the table until I was standing right next to him. I leaned down, my lips inches from his ear. "I wanted you to see. I whispered. I wanted you to see exactly who beat you. I wanted you to know that the useless orphan just bought the company your family worked for, using a trust fund worth $1.05 trillion. I pulled back and looked at his face. The number hit him. 1.05 trillion. The magnitude of his loss, the scale of his mistake, crashed down on him. He looked like he was going to vomit. You could have had it all, Julian, I said, almost gently. If you had just been decent, if you had just been a man, you could have ruled the world with me. But you chose Tiffany Sterling. You chose the shiny object. I reached out and picked up the signed contract from the table. I held it up. You sold your father-in-law to save yourself. You sold your wife to save your job. And now, you have sold yourself to me. I pressed the intercom button on the table. Damon, I said, send them in. The double doors opened again, but this time, it was not a waiter with champagne. It was Detective Miller and 4 uniformed officers. Julian jumped up, knocking his chair over. No, we had a deal, Verity. Please. The deal is concluded, I said, turning my back on him and walking toward the window. Officers, this man has just confessed to conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying corporate records. The evidence is on the table, and the recording has been sent to the district attorney. Verity! Julian screamed as the officers grabbed him. You can't do this. I am your husband, Verity. Beatrice was wailing. A high-pitched keening sound as an officer handcuffed her. My house, my reputation, you are ruining us. I stared out at the city lights. I did not look back. I listened to the sounds of the struggle, the click of handcuffs, the screams of a man who realized too late that he had thrown away a diamond to pick up a stone. Get them out of my sight, I said to the reflection in the glass. The doors slammed shut. The screams were cut off. Silence returned to the room. Absolute. Heavy silence. I looked at my reflection. The white suit was still pristine. There was no wine stain. There was no mud. There was only the cold, hard surface of a woman who had won. But as I looked at the empty room, at the overturned chair, at the water dripping from the table, I felt a strange hollowness in my chest. It was done. The revenge was complete. They were destroyed. I walked to the table and picked up the contract. I looked at Julian's signature. It was shaky. I had won. So why did I feel like I was still standing in the rain? Damon stepped out from the shadows of the adjoining office. He had been watching the whole time. He didn't say a word. He just walked over and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He slid one across the table to me. I picked it up. My hand was steady. To closure, Damon said quietly. I looked at him. To closure. I drank. It burned, but it wasn't enough to warm the ice inside me. What now? I asked. Damon looked at the door. Now we run the world. V. I turned back to the window, looking at the city that now belonged to me. Yes, I whispered. Now we run the world, but the question remained, echoing in the silence of the 88th floor. Is that enough? The moment of recognition did not bring clarity to Julian Thorne. It brought a fracture to his reality. He stood frozen, his hand halfway extended towards the woman he thought was a stranger, while his eyes locked onto the face of the wife he had discarded. The cognitive dissonance was almost violent. He looked at the white suit, the diamonds, the office that floated above the clouds, and then he looked at me. His brain could not reconcile the 2 images. Verity, the orphan who clipped coupons, and V, the titan of Wall Street. He took a stumbling step back, his arrogant smile collapsing into a rictus of confusion. Verity, he stammered, his voice trembling. You are alive, but... How? What are you doing here? He looked around the room, searching for an explanation that would salvage his ego. His eyes darted to the door, then back to me, desperate to lower my status to something he could understand. Do you work here? Julian asked, a pathetic note of hope entering his voice. Did you get a job as an assistant? Is that it? Did Miss V hire you to play a trick on me? Is she watching? Is this some kind of test? Beatrice let out a breathy, nervous laugh, clutching at this straw of hope. Of course, that must be it. You are the help. You always were the help. You are just the receptionist for the real owner. I did not speak. I simply watched them writhe. The side door to the private office opened. Damon Vane walked in. He moved with the silent lethality of a panther, carrying a leather-bound folio stamped with the Archon crest. He did not look at Julian or Beatrice. He walked straight to me, stopped, and bowed his head with profound, performative respect. "Madam Chairwoman," Damon said, his voice deep and resonating through the silent room. "The acquisition contracts for the Sterling Group are finalized. The transfer of all debts and assets to your personal trust is complete. We are just waiting for your final seal." Julian's face went slack. "Chairwoman?" "Damon," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on my ex-husband. "Mr. Thorne seems confused about the organizational chart. Perhaps you should clarify. Verity Cross, now legally Verity Vane, is the sole owner and chairwoman of Archon Capital," Damon stated coldly. Turning to face Julian, "She owns the building you are standing in. She owns the bank that holds your mortgage. And as of 5 minutes ago, she owns you." "No," Julian whispered, shaking his head. "That is impossible. She has no money. She had nothing. We checked. She was a pauper." I reached out and picked up the heavy file Damon had placed on the table. It was the deed to the Vane Trust. I threw it down in front of them. The heavy thud echoed like a gavel strike. "You checked Verity Cross," I said, my voice sharp as a scalpel. "You did not check the granddaughter of Elias Vane." I walked around the table, closing the distance between us until I was looming over him. "You think I bought the Sterling Group because I believe in your vision. Julian, you think I care about your pathetic Nebula project or your shipping routes?" I laughed, a cold, sharp sound that made Beatrice flinch. "I have assets under management totaling $1.05 trillion. I enunciated every syllable. "I could buy a small country if I wanted to. I did not buy this company because of its potential. I used $1.05 trillion to buy it for one single reason." I leaned in, my face inches from his. "I bought it so that I could have the exquisite pleasure of firing you properly." Julian looked like he had been punched in the gut. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. You spent billions. Just for this? For this moment," I confirmed. "To see the look on your face when you realize that the woman you threw out in the rain is the one holding the lightning bolt." "But I signed the deal," Julian cried out, pointing at the papers. "I cooperated. You said—" "I said I wanted the truth," I interrupted. "And you gave it to me." I picked up a remote control from the table and pressed a button. A massive screen on the wall flickered to life. It displayed a waveform, the audio recording of our conversation from 10 minutes ago. Julian's voice boomed through the speakers, loud and clear. "They are not my family. They were business partners. Marcus was reckless. Tiffany was a liability. I call it mutiny. I call it leadership." Beatrice's voice followed. "She was dead weight. We had to cut her loose. Tiffany useless. Absolutely useless. A spoiled brat." I paused the recording. "Do you know who else is listening to this? Julian?" I asked. Julian looked at the door, terror flooding his eyes. "The police. You said the police." "The police are waiting in the lobby," I said. "But I invited someone else to the viewing party first, someone who was very interested in your mutiny." I pressed the intercom button. "Send her in." The double doors at the back of the room flew open. Tiffany Sterling did not walk in. She exploded into the room. She was not the polished socialite I remembered. She was a wreck. Her hair was wild, her makeup smeared, and she was wearing the same clothes she had been arrested in. I had arranged for her bail to be posted anonymously just an hour ago, with specific instructions for her driver to bring her here immediately. I told her that her husband was selling her out. She had arrived just in time to hear the recording. "You bastard!" Tiffany screamed. It was a primal sound, half shriek, half roar. She sprinted across the marble floor, a blur of fury. Julian barely had time to turn around before Tiffany launched herself at him. She didn't slap him, she tackled him. Her nails, manicured to sharp points, raked across his face, leaving deep, bloody furrows. "Ow, Tiffany. Stop," Julian shrieked, trying to shield his face. "You sold me out," she screamed, pounding her fists into his chest. "You told them I was a liability after I bought you your cars, after I got you your job, you parasitic worm." Beatrice tried to intervene. "Get off him, you crazy witch! Get off my son!" Tiffany spun around and shoved Beatrice. It wasn't a gentle push. Beatrice flew backward, tripping over her own expensive heels and landing hard on the floor in a heap of silk and indignation. "And you?" Tiffany yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the old woman. "You miserable old hag, I heard what you said, useless. I paid off your credit card debt 3 times I bought that penthouse you live in." "I am a thorn," Beatrice screeched from the floor, trying to adjust her wig which had gone askew. "You should be grateful we let you marry into our bloodline. Your bloodline is trash." Tiffany grabbed a crystal pitcher of water from the table and hurled it. It missed Beatrice's head by inches, shattering against the wall, showering them both in glass and water. I stood back, leaning against the edge of the table. Damon handed me a cup of tea, Earl Grey, perfectly steeped. I took a sip, watching the chaos unfold with a sense of deep, serene satisfaction. It was a beautiful disaster. The 3 people who had destroyed my life were now destroying each other. The veneer of high society had vanished. There was no etiquette here, no pretense of class, just greed, rage, and the ugly truth of who they really were. Julian managed to push Tiffany off him. He was bleeding from his cheek, his suit torn. "Tiffany, listen, it was a trick. She tricked us. That is Verity. It's Verity Cross." Tiffany stopped, chest heaving. She looked at me. She squinted, her eyes red and swollen. "Verity," she breathed. "Hello, Tiffany," I said calmly, lowering my teacup. "Nice to see you again. I believe the last time we met, you threw wine on my dress and told me to return my husband to his real owner." I gestured to Julian, who was cowering behind a chair. "He is all yours," I said. "I am returning him, although I am afraid his value has depreciated significantly. He is currently unemployed, destitute, and facing federal charges for fraud." Tiffany looked from me to Julian, the realization dawning on her. You are Ms. V. You bought the debt." "I own it all," I said, "including the shirt on his back." Tiffany began to laugh. It was a hysterical, broken sound. She turned back to Julian. "You idiot. You absolute moron. You left a billionaire for me, and then you sold me out for a job you didn't even get." "I didn't know," Julian cried. "How could I know?" "Because you are stupid." Tiffany lunged at him again, slapping him hard across the face. Crack. "That is for the anniversary dinner." Crack. "That is for the embezzlement." Crack. "And that is for being a loser." Beatrice was trying to crawl away, whimpering. "Call the police. Someone call the police." "Oh, they are here," I said. I nodded to Damon. He opened the door again. Detective Miller and the uniformed officers finally stepped in. They had been waiting in the hall, allowing the domestic dispute to play out. "All right, break it up," Miller said, though he didn't look like he was in a hurry. "Tiffany Sterling, your bail is revoked due to the assault. Julian Thorne, you are under arrest for securities fraud and conspiracy. Beatrice Thorne, you are under arrest as an accessory." "No," Beatrice wailed as an officer hauled her up from the floor. "I am an old woman. I have high blood pressure. You can't do this." "Tell it to the judge," the officer said. Snapping the cuffs on her wrists, Julian was sobbing now, broken and defeated. He looked at me one last time as they dragged him towards the door. His face was bleeding, his eyes wild. "Verity," he begged. "Please, mercy." I set my teacup down on the table with a soft clink. Mercy, I asked. I don't recall that clause in our divorce settlement. I looked at the security guards who were standing by. Clean this trash out of my building, I ordered, and burn the chairs they sat in. I don't want the smell of failure lingering in my office. Julian let out a wail of despair as he was shoved out the door. Tiffany was cursing, spitting at the officers. Beatrice was fainting, or pretending to. And then, they were gone. The room was suddenly quiet. The only sound was the hum of the city outside and the beating of my own heart. I looked at the shattered glass on the floor. I looked at the contract on the table. It was over. Damon walked over and stood beside me. That was theatrical. It was necessary, I said. They needed to understand. It wasn't enough to beat them. They needed to know they had lost to me. And now? Damon asked. I walked to the window. Looking out at the empire of lights that spread below me, the Sterling Group towers were out there somewhere, dark and vulnerable. Tomorrow, the V logo would be installed on their roof. Now, I said, we get back to work. I have a company to restructure. But as I looked at my reflection in the glass, I saw something different. The anger that had fueled me for 3 years was gone. The fire had burned out. I was empty, but it was a clean emptiness, a space where I could finally build something new. Damon, I said, not turning around. Yes, chairwoman. Order me a new pot roast, I said softly. I haven't had a good meal in 5 years. Consider it done, he replied. I smiled, a real smile, the first one since the rain. The revenge was finished. My life was just beginning. The legal dismantling of a human life is a quiet process. There are no explosions, no dramatic soundtracks, and rarely any shouting. It happens in the rustling of papers, the stamping of court orders, and the monotone reading of judgments. 2 weeks after the arrests at the Archon Tower, I sat in a private deposition room. On the other side of the glass partition sat Julian Thorne. He looked hollow. The designer suit had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit that washed out his complexion. The arrogance that had defined him for a decade had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified child. He was looking at me through the glass, his hands cuffed to the table. He still believed there was a way out. He still believed that the contract he had signed, the one where he sold his soul for immunity from Archon, had a loophole. My client demands access to the funds promised in the acquisition agreement, Julian's court-appointed lawyer said. He was a young, overworked man who clearly knew he was fighting a losing battle. The contract stated a purchase price of $1 per share. Mr. Thorne holds 2 million shares. That is $2 million. He needs those funds to pay for his bail and his defense against the criminal charges. I signaled Damon. Damon slid a single sheet of paper across the table to the young lawyer. It was page 42 of the acquisition agreement Julian had signed without reading. Read Section 9, Paragraph C, Damon said calmly. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. He read silently for a moment, and then his face went pale. He looked at Julian with pity. What? Julian asked, his voice cracking. What does it say? Give me my money. Mr. Thorne, the lawyer said slowly, this clause, it is a standard indemnity and personal guarantee provision, but it is unusually broad. It states that in the event the seller admits to prior knowledge of fraud, which you did on the recording, the seller accepts full personal liability for all debts incurred by the company during their tenure as an executive. I don't understand, Julian stammered. It means, I said, leaning forward, that you did not just sell me the company. Julian, you agreed to personally cover the difference between the company's value and its debts. The Sterling Group owes creditors $450 million. The company's assets, after the fraud was revealed, are worth maybe $50 million? I paused to let the math sink in. You owe Archon Capital $400 million, I said. And since you do not have $400 million, we are executing the lien on your personal assets. The $2 million from the share sale that was seized immediately to pay down the interest, your bank account seized, Your stock portfolio seized. The Thorne estate seized. Julian stared at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. You are not just broke, Julian, I said softly. You are $400 million in debt. You will work for the rest of your life, and every single paycheck will be garnished until you die. You will never own a home again. You will never own a car again. You will never even own a credit card. But my mother, Julian whispered. The house is in her name. Beatrice co-signed the loans to fund your lifestyle 3 years ago, I replied. She is liable too. The bank trucks are on their way to the estate right now. Julian slumped forward, his forehead hitting the metal table with a dull thud. He began to weep. It was a pathetic, broken sound. I stood up. I believe we are done here. Verity, Julian sobbed, not looking up. Why? Because you taught me the value of a contract, I said, and I learned very well. I walked out of the room. I did not look back. The destruction of the Sterling family was just as absolute. Tiffany Sterling, facing charges of money laundering and assault, tried to sue Julian for divorce and damages. She hired a team of high-profile lawyers, promising them a cut of the settlement. But there was no settlement to be had. You cannot bleed a stone. When the courts realized that Julian had negative net worth, Tiffany's lawyers dropped her within hours. She was left alone, facing prison time, with her father in a vegetative state and her family name synonymous with fraud. The last I heard, she was trying to sell her story to a tabloid for $5,000 to pay her rent. The final act of the tragedy played out on a rainy Tuesday, almost exactly 3 years and 1 month after I had been thrown out of the Thorne estate. I sat in the back of my car, a phantom black Rolls-Royce with tinted windows. Damon was sitting beside me, working on his tablet, but he paused as we turned onto the familiar winding road of the gated community. Are you sure you want to do this? Damon asked. I need to see the end, I said. I need to verify the asset recovery. The car slowed as we approached the driveway. It was a chaotic scene. A massive moving truck was parked on the lawn, its wheels churning up the mud, the same mud I had knelt in. Men in blue jumpsuits were hauling furniture out of the front door. I recognized the items. The mahogany dining table where I had been humiliated, the sofa where Julian used to nap while I cleaned, the expensive paintings Beatrice loved to brag about, and there they were. Beatrice Thorne was standing on the wet grass. She was wearing a tracksuit that looked 2 sizes too small, her hair messy and undyed, showing gray roots. She was screaming at the movers. That is a Louis XIV chair, she shrieked, grabbing the arm of a large man carrying a velvet armchair. Put it down, you peasants. You can't take my things. I am Beatrice Thorne. The man shook her off effortlessly. Lady, move or I am calling the cops. The bank owns this chair. The bank owns the grass you are standing on. It is a mistake, she wailed, looking around wildly. My son will fix this, Julian. Julian was there too. He had been released on bail pending his trial, likely paid for by selling his watch. The last thing he owned. He stood by the mailbox, holding a plastic garbage bag that contained his clothes. He looked aged. In the span of a few weeks, he had aged 20 years. His posture was slumped, his eyes vacant. He wasn't screaming. He was just watching his life being carried away. Piece by piece, he looked exactly like I had looked that night, defeated, homeless, alone. Beatrice turned on him. She began to hit his chest with her weak, trembling fists. This is your fault, she screamed. You and that stupid ambition, you lost it all. You promised me a retirement in the Hamptons. You promised me millions. You useless. Pathetic excuse for a son. Julian didn't fight back. He didn't even flinch. He just stood there, taking the abuse, staring at the ground. Then, he looked up. He saw the Rolls-Royce idling at the curb. The rain was falling softly, blurring the world, but our eyes met through the glass. I knew he couldn't see me clearly through the tint, but he knew. He knew who was inside. He took a step toward the car. His face crumpled. He raised a hand, not in anger, But in a gesture of supplication, a beg, he mouthed a word. Help. Damon looked at me. His hand hovered over the door handle. Do you want to stop? Do you want to say anything to them? I looked at Julian. I looked at Beatrice, who was now weeping in the mud, clutching a porcelain vase the movers had left behind. I thought about the anger I had carried for 3 years. I thought about the fire that had driven me to learn finance, to learn combat, to become V. I thought about the moment I swore I would make them pay. And I realized something. Stopping the car would be an act of acknowledgement. If I rolled down the window, if I spat on them, if I laughed at them, I would still be engaging with them. I would still be giving them my energy. They were not worth my anger. They were not even worth my pity. They were just bad debts that had been written off. No, I said, turning my head forward, breaking eye contact with the man I once thought was my world. Drive on. Are you sure? Damon asked softly. I am sure, I replied. I have a board meeting at 2 o'clock. We are late. The driver nodded and pressed the accelerator. The car surged forward, the powerful engine purring silently. I did not look back in the rearview mirror. I did not watch them shrink into the distance. They were part of the landscape now, just background noise in a city that belonged to me. Julian Thorne and Beatrice Thorne ceased to exist in my world the moment the car turned the corner. 6 months later, the Archon Tower pierced the sky, a needle of steel and glass dominating the Manhattan skyline. I stood on the observation deck of the penthouse, the wind whipping at my coat. Below me, the city was a grid of golden lights. It was beautiful, it was chaotic, and it was mine. The Sterling Group had been fully absorbed into Archon. We had liquidated the toxic assets, restructured the shipping lanes, and turned the company profitable within 2 quarters. The profits were donated to a new foundation. I had started a fund for orphans and displaced women, providing them with education and legal resources. I heard the door open behind me. Damon walked out onto the terrace. He was holding 2 glasses of champagne. He came to stand beside me, leaning against the railing. The Asian markets just closed, he said. We are up 4%. Good, I said, taking the glass. We stood in silence for a moment, listening to the hum of the city. Do you ever think about them? Damon asked. Julian, the family. Who? I asked. Damon smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes. That is the right answer. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers interlaced with mine. It wasn't the possessive grip of Julian, who wanted a trophy. It wasn't the controlling grip of a mentor. It was the steady, equal grip of a partner. We had built something incredible together. We had started in the dark, in a bunker in the Alps, and we had climbed to the sun. You did it, V, Damon said softly. You won. We won, I corrected, squeezing his hand. I looked out at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. I remembered the girl who had stood in the rain. Broken and bleeding, I wished I could go back and tell her that it would be okay, but I couldn't. That girl had to die so that I could live. I raised my glass to the city. To the future, I said. To us, Damon replied. We drank, the champagne crisp and cold. I looked down at the streets one last time. Somewhere down there, in a small, cramped apartment, Julian was likely eating a microwave dinner, wondering where it all went wrong. Somewhere down there, Beatrice was complaining to a social worker. Let them wonder. Let them complain. I turned away from the edge, pulling Damon with me back toward the warmth of the penthouse. The best revenge is not screaming. It is not violence. It is not even destruction, though that is a necessary part of the process. I paused at the door, looking back at the world I had conquered. The best revenge is living a life so full, so high, and so magnificent that the people who hurt you become nothing more than footnotes in your biography. The best revenge, I whispered to the wind, is not doing harm to them, but letting them watch you own the world they crave, while they no longer have the standing to even look up at you. I closed the door. shutting out the cold, and stepped into the light. Thank you so much for listening to Verity's journey of resilience and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please leave a comment below with your city or country, and let's chat about what you thought of Julian's final punishment. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Crimson Drama Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this story with more people who need a reminder that even when you are down, you are never out. Your support means the world to us.